Let me read you from the South Wales Echo, if you don't mind, from Friday's edition. Solicitors acting for a man who says his relationship with his partner broke down because of lockdown restrictions have written to First Minister Mark Drakeford to tell him he will be the respondent in a High Court legal challenge. Michael O'Brien, who is bringing the action, is well known as one of the Cardiff Newsagent Three, who spent 11 years in prison for a murder they did not commit before their convictions were quashed. Now Mr O'Brien, who currently lives near Aberdare, has instructed his solicitors to use human rights legislation to challenge the lockdown regulations. And Michael reached out to us, when I say to us, to me, over the weekend. I'm glad he did. Let's welcome him to the programme. Michael, lovely to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What a story you have, Michael. I mean, reading about you today, your own personal story before all of this, it's the stuff of, legend, really, the sort of thing you'd expect to see in a film. We might touch on a little bit of that later on. Thanks for coming on today. So tell us what happened then. Sorry, genuinely sorry to hear that your relationship broke down. I do hear from a lot of people who tell me that because of the lockdown, especially when they weren't living with their partner, or girlfriend or boyfriend, that it put a big strain on their relationship. Tell us about yourself. What happened exactly?
Well, what happened? I met a young lady a couple of months ago, and trying to build up a relationship with her. And, then the COVID restrictions came into force and I wasn't allowed to see her. I haven't seen her for over a month. And how are you supposed to keep a relationship going in those circumstances? You can't do it by telephone. And, I wasn't allowed in her house. She wasn't allowed in my house. And yet we live in the same borough. I mean, it's really absurd, the COVID restrictions they're placing on, what about the right to family life? The right to start a family or whatever you want to do. And I feel very angry that I was in a good position at one stage. I thought we were getting along fine, and it just got too much for both of us. Bearing in mind that I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because I was wrongfully imprisoned, and I still feel like even though I'm outside, because of the restrictions, I feel like I can't move, and I still feel like I'm still in prison in my mind.
Yeah, I met a couple, Michael. I was thinking of you. I was thinking of the couple today when I was reading up about you. I met a couple in a park in Salford a few months ago, and a bit younger than us, it must be said, a bit younger than us, and they were not cohabiting, and they were talking to me about the difficulties of not being able to go to one another's houses. The only time they met was in the park with their dogs, and I asked them, and I wasn't being cheeky or I wasn't, trying to insult them, and I would ask you the same question now. I asked them, why did you obey that? And why did you and your girlfriend of the time obey that and not just say, to hell with that, we will see who we want to see?
Well, my attitude was, I don't care. They can take me, they can arrest me, but my girlfriend was more conservative than me and took the view that, took the government line, if you like, that, I don't want to catch COVID, do you know what I mean? And she was in a state of fear and panic. My attitude was like, I don't care what they say. If I want to go and see my family, I'll go and see my family. And I'm doing that now. I'm in Aberdare at the moment, but my family are all in Cardiff. I've got no support network up here. So the only support network I've got is to go out of the borough. Now, I'm taking a chance every day that I could get stopped by the police, and so be it, because I will challenge their £30 fines or their £1,000 fines. I'm prepared to put my neck on the chopping block and say, well, come on then, let's do it. And that's the way I am. I've successfully sued and taken the authorities to court on 6 separate occasions, and I haven't lost a case yet in the courts where I fought for my rights.
Yeah.
So, I am well known for standing up for my rights, but not everybody's the same as myself. And and COVID is scary in some respects. I understand that, but when your girlfriend doesn't want to catch it and thinks that she's going to catch it from me, even though I'm only on the corner from her, I'm about 8 minutes away from her, and she doesn't have the same views as what I do, that's where the complexities come into place and the conflict comes into place.
You mentioned there about the PTSD, and we hear a lot on television and radio at the moment about mental health, and you've likened what has been happening and how it is affecting people. You've likened it to being locked up when you were wrongfully imprisoned for so many years for a murder you didn't commit. You would compare it to that, Michael. You really would.
I really would, because although my body is free, my mind isn't. Prison leaves you, but you don't leave prison. I don't know whether you get my gist, what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
I've left prison, I know that, but my mind is still there. I still feel locked up. I still feel cooped up, that I can't do what I want to do. As I said, I've got to. They're trying to make out that I'm a criminal for breaking the law just to go and see my own family, when in fact the only one who's breaking the law is the policymakers, because Article 8 is quite clear that everyone has a right to family life and private life, and that's all I'm asking the government is, don't push me into a situation where I have to take you to court. And unfortunately, they put me in this position because I'm not going to just sit down and take it and accept whatever the government says. I know COVID's a real issue. If I had it, I would self-isolate. If I was ill, then I would do the right thing. But because I don't suffer from COVID and I got no problem, it's like a joint enterprise where they're saying, well, there's a few people who are not obeying the rules, we'll punish them all. And that's exactly what is happening right now. We're all being done by joint enterprise just because of a few who do have it and who won't self-isolate. The
Welsh government is taking a very, you could argue, very draconian approach, maybe more draconian than the Scottish government or the UK government, you could say. And how is that? I mean, you're interacting with people. What about your own family? How do they feel about that? I mean, they've even talked about blocking the country off to people who might be living in areas with high cases. Like, I'm in Salford, as you know, and they're telling us all the time that cases are on the increase in Salford, Michael. However, hospital admissions are not up at Salford Royal. There's no evidence in the community I live in that people are sick or suffering, but they keep telling us this, meaning that if I try to go to Wales, if Drakeford has his way, I might be turned back or arrested if I refuse to leave. What are your neighbours and friends and your family, what are they saying about this? How do they feel about these measures being imposed in Wales? Because it seems to be worse in Wales.
Well, I think there's a big fear factor at the moment because of the statistics, the government, both governments, in England and Wales especially, I think they're scaremongering the public. I do not know anyone in my community who has had COVID, and yet we're in a lockdown. The Ron and Cunnan Taff area of Wales, as well as Bridgend and Glamorgan, they're all shut down. Yet, when you ask the government about the statistics, it's all if, buts and maybes, or what could occur, rather than what has occurred. So, my personal view is they have abused too much of our human rights. It's not just Article 8. There's a right to freedom of assembly, to protest. There's a right to mix with others. These are basic human rights. You know what I mean? These are not something which can be trampled on or shouldn't be trampled on like they are at the moment. I mean, we're going back to the 1600s or maybe even the 1200s when the Black Death and stuff like that was about, where they put a cross on your door, like, you know what I mean? If you had the plague or something, you had to stay in your house and stuff like that. This is how draconic these measures are.
You're referring to the Human Rights Act 1998, of course. If there was a government spokesperson here, he or she would say, Michael, that's all very well, but we've given ourselves these powers under the Coronavirus Act 2020. We've given ourselves these powers, and they were waived through Parliament by the Labour Party, and they were given the nod of assent by the House of Lords. So they would say, look, we're in a pandemic. It's difficult for everybody. Everybody has got to do the best they can in these circumstances, but this is the way it is, and again, under these Coronavirus Act powers, we do have the right to do that. They would say that, your likelihood of succeeding, Michael, might not be great. How would you respond to that?
Well, I accept about the Human Rights Act, but I'm more interested in the Human Rights Court of Human Rights, which we've been signatories since 1966. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's only in exceptional circumstances, and this is what it all boils down to, what is exceptional and what is proportionate to interfere with the right to family life. Now, I think if it went to the European courts, they would take a different view. They would take a different view completely. I think these are not minimum restrictions; these are maximum restrictions, and interference with our rights.
And there doesn't at the moment there doesn't seem to be any way out of it, does there? I speak to Simon Dolan occasionally. He was on yesterday. Simon, was it yesterday or the day before? It might have been yesterday. The days just bleed into one another. And he's engaged in his own battle with the UK government. And while all of that is going on, incredibly, you've got the government saying, we'll keep us in limbo on the 3-tier system. And you have the Labour Party demanding that we go into another national lockdown. And scarily, even more scary than that is, and I don't like to use those types of words, but you've got the health secretary saying that this is basically going to carry on until such time as we have a vaccine. So there doesn't seem to be any end in sight, Michael.
Well, that's what concerns me. I think it's somebody like me or somebody like Mr. Doolan who see it for what it is and feels like, they can't lock us down forever. We shouldn't be in house arrest. We haven't committed any criminal offences, so therefore why are we being treated like criminals? Because that's how I feel personally, that I'm under house arrest because I can't go to X, Y, and Z. And when you do, you've got to wear a mask, and then you've got to go 2 meters apart. And if you're not 2 meters apart, you'll get arrested. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life, and I doubt if we'll ever see anything as draconic as what they've done with these rules. And what I'm concerned about is, when's it going to end? When are they going to stop abusing our human rights? When are they going to stop and realise that this COVID is here to stay? You know what I mean? It's not going to go away. You know what I mean? Locking us down, all it does is slow the virus down. But as soon as they open us back up again, the numbers go up again.
Yeah.
This is what they're telling. Now, if that is indeed the case,
yeah.
I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but he said something the other day which I thought was very important. He said, we're going to have to learn to live with this virus rather than us, living in pigeonholes, if you like.
He did say that.
In the house and,
yeah, he did say that, didn't he? But at the same time, he wants people to take a vaccine within the next few weeks. I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole because, well, I wouldn't anyway. But certainly not one that was rushed out in a few months. Let me remind our listeners: Michael O'Brien is on the line today from Aberdare. Michael is one of the Cardiff Newsagent Three. He was wrongfully convicted of murder and spent 11 years in jail for something he didn't do. Can you imagine that? I couldn't imagine it. There is a book about it called The Death of Justice by Michael O'Brien, and I reckon it's well worth a read. Michael is taking the Welsh Assembly, he's taking the Welsh First Minister to court over this and challenging the legality of this and claiming that it infringes upon his human rights. And he cited in the case, the fact that he was in a relationship, it was going well, it was a young relationship, but because of the measures, because of the inability for people to mix outside of, or mix in other people's houses, that it put a big strain on the relationship and it didn't progress. So he's taken the Welsh First Minister to court over this. This is very interesting indeed. Lots of comment on this on Twitter, understandably as well. The Welsh First Minister, of course, Mark Drakeford, in the news because he's talking about maybe introducing a circuit break lockdown, a full lockdown in Wales, just as has happened in Northern Ireland today, and also banning people coming to Wales from England, depending on where they are originating from, depending on the case numbers there. Well, all we can say, Michael, is good luck with that, mate. People will watch that with great interest. I know the South Wales Echo covered it. It's a substantial enough story that you would imagine other newspapers would have covered it. But when I went looking for it online the other day, I can't find any mentions of it in the national press. That must be disappointing.
Well, it is disappointing, but not surprising, because if you have a look at all the mainstream press, not one of them is going on about human rights. Not one of them have tried to protect the public's human rights in any way, shape, or form. You haven't even heard anything from the groups called Liberty, which is a well-renowned group in London who talks about civil liberties all the time. But the silence is deafening from these people. It beggars belief. Marriages are being ruined because of these rules. You know what I mean? Relationships are being damaged. You know what I mean? Family relations are breaking up. And nobody's saying a word about it. And I find that really astonishing. In this day and age, and especially with a number of newspapers like the Independent, the Guardian. I don't expect the Sun newspaper to say anything because they're a yes paper. But some of the more progressive papers like the Guardian and the Independent, you would expect them to say something, and yet they haven't said anything. Even the Private Eye magazine, which is normally very vocal against the government, have said absolutely nothing. And that is shocking.
It's big news, Michael. It's big news because the Welsh authorities have acknowledged they've acknowledged the action. They've accepted that it's there. The Welsh government said, we confirm that we have received the correspondence, and it'll progress from there. So it is big news, and it should be covered. It's astonishing to me that it hasn't been, and maybe people might call me naive. I wish you the very best with it, and you can stay in touch with us and keep us updated on it. Mental health's a big thing here, isn't it? What must it be doing, this situation, and the arbitrary measures and the constant changing of the measures and jumping, flip-flopping from here to there? Yes, we will lock down. No, we won't. Now we'll have a tier 2. We'll have a tier 3. It must be affecting people in ways that maybe are unimaginable to maybe to somebody like me. It must be hitting people's mental health pretty hard.
Well, I think, I don't want to go on about myself all the time, because this isn't just about me. There's a lot of people like me who are afraid, they're afraid to go forward. They're afraid to tackle the government, because I've taken the government to court before. I don't see it as, it's just like a normal day job to me, because they're always breaching somebody's human rights. But when it affects me and I'm allowed to take them to court, I hope there's a bigger and wider picture here where it helps many other people with mental health, people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, because it's very important. People have no idea, and I'll give you an idea of what my everyday life is like. I still suffer from what I saw when I was in prison. I watched people murdered, inmates on inmates, killing each other. And I seen 7 people killed in Longlat in prison in Evesham, and you can check out the statistics between the time I was there and by the time I left. And I seen some horrific things which I wouldn't want any of your listeners to ever witness. And I have to live with that every day, trying to go to sleep in the night and remembering these people who have died. And I watched one die in front of me. This is not normal. I thought it was normal. You know what I mean, in the end, because that was happening on a regular occurrence.
Yeah.
So I have to live with these things. I lost my daughter when I was inside. My stepfather died when I was inside. I lost my liberty. My marriage broke up. I had 2 children. One of them died when I was in prison. I lost one in 2012 as well, since I've been released. My other son died of a genetic disorder. I've managed to bounce back from that. So all these things, it's not just one particular issue. All of it in the round, you could, no matter how strong a person you are, it takes a toll on you. And being locked down and you can't go out of your house, it's like being in prison again. And that's how I feel. And I know there's a lot of other people who feel the same way as me, who haven't gone to prison, but still suffer from post-traumatic stress, ex-soldiers, things like that, all over the country. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with me, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, yes, Mr. O'Brien should take this forward. This is right. And will be for me. So I know I'm not going to have everybody on my side, but, I'm doing what I think is right, not in a malicious manner, but I just feel I have no choice to do this. because what else can I do? Just sit in my house and be depressed 24 hours a day, drinking coffee and tea and not knowing what to do. There's only so much housework you can do, and there's only so much, computer you can do. What else are you supposed to do from that?
Michael O'Brien is our guest. You don't have to go down this road, Michael. I wanted to talk a little bit about, just as briefly as you want, or not at all, about your own personal story. But before that, obedience, Michael. Are people too obedient? Are they too quick to follow the rules and regulations without questioning them, do you think?
I think so, and I got to be honest with you, before this miscarriages of justice happened to me, I believed every word the government said, the police said, the lawyers, everybody in official capacity, I believed. I had no reason to disbelieve what they were saying. And it's only when the bubble is burst and something happens to you, like what's happened to me, that your mind is actually opened. And once it's open and you see the system for what it is, you can see. Winston Churchill, he might not be everybody's cup of tea, but he did say one good thing. He said, the system is run on lies with an element of truth. And that man, that was when he came out of power. And that is so true.
When I've interviewed a few people over the years who were wrongfully convicted of pretty heinous crimes. They didn't do them. I've interviewed people like Paul Hill and Jerry Conlon, going back years. I could name a few more. I interviewed men who spent 15, 16 years on death row and were reprieved very late on. And I sat there mesmerised listening to these men and feeling that I'm not as tough or as hard as maybe I think I am, and feeling I could never have coped with what they went through. Your case is very, very well known, and I was looking into it today, and I've got to say this. Michael won a huge civil case against South Wales Police back in 2000, in the early to mid-2000s, 2006 it might have been, 2007. And the conduct of the South Wales Police in prosecuting the three men that were found guilty of the murder of the newsagent back in 1988, the conduct of the police was absolutely shocking. Philip Saunders was the newsagent that was murdered, and Michael and two other men were arrested for it and should never have been arrested from the get-go. But from there on in, the conduct of the police, it reads like something out of a film or a John Grisham book. It's disgusting. It's so obvious that these men didn't do it, that Michael O'Brien didn't do it. And he won a massive civil case against the police in 2006. Thank God for that. How does any man cope when you're in a dock and you're found guilty of something you didn't do, you didn't do it, and you're facing a life sentence? How do you cope with that? What goes through your mind? Are you numb? Are you angry? Do you want to cry? How do you deal with that, Michael?
Well, I think I had a number of those things. I can remember when I first went in on remand, I thought it was just a horrible dream. I sat on the bed in the cell. I can remember falling asleep then late that night, thinking I'm going to wake up in the morning and all this is going to be gone. This is just a nightmare. This is just a dream. And then when I woke up and realised that I was actually in a prison cell and this was actually happening, I nearly had a nervous breakdown. And I remember one of the prison officers saying to me, "O'Brien, get yourself together." And I couldn't get the words out at the time, but my brain was telling me to tell him, if I could get my head together, don't you think I would? But I just couldn't get the words out. And I'll never forget that. It was November the 30th. We'd been in on remand for a couple of weeks, and I was in an emotional state like I've never, ever been. I just could not believe what was going on. And I lost my daughter just before the trial as well. My daughter died of a cot death when I was waiting for the trial. Christ. So I was traumatized by my daughter's death, as well as being traumatized by being wrongly accused. And then I had to face the trial. And, I was very, very tearful, upset, angry. I had a mixture of emotions. I don't know how I managed to get through that time. There were some wonderful people I did meet. There was a friend called Jason Baker, who was a good friend of mine. he was a big lad, like, you know what I mean? And he said to me, listen, you've got to start eating, because I wouldn't eat. And he was bringing me food, and he was helping me and doing what he can. And there was, you know, regardless of what people say about other prisoners, if it wasn't for some of these prisoners, I probably wouldn't be alive now. And Jason was one of those persons. And I hadn't seen him for 30 years. And I recently met up with him a couple of years ago and ended up living with him. So, you know, that's the circumstances which I found myself in. But if it wasn't for people like Jason, I probably still wouldn't be alive.
You think the human being is capable of coping with anything? Because you saw, as you mentioned earlier on, you said you saw, and I believe you, you saw 7 people being killed. I can't imagine the violence that you saw. And, you know, as a decent bloke going about your business before all of that happened, you wouldn't have known much violence or seen much violence. Yeah, it was like a living hell being in prison for those 11 years. And yet you came out the other side of it. We must be capable of taking anything, Michael, really. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you adapt to your surroundings. You've got 2 choices. You either sink or you swim. So, you know, I had 2 choices. I either tried to rectify the matter, I educated myself, which is what I did. I want to mention that because I had no qualifications when I went into prison, and I studied law. I changed the law 6 times. Once when I was in prison, access to journalist case. They were allowed to visit prisoners who were maintaining their innocence. That was another case I took to the House of Lords. And I was self-taught in law. And so there was a lot of positives that come out of my wrongful imprisonment, if that makes any sense to people. I know they might think that's a bit, wow, that's quite heavy. But I looked at the positive things, and you've got to look at the positive things as well. I've wrote 6 books, by the way, as well. I'm on my 7th, which is being published next year, about death row, Texas death row. I wrote 2 award-winning books. I won 4 awards for the first 2, Prisons Exposed and the Death of Justice. So I educated myself when I was in there, and I used my time wisely. And my message to anybody who's listening to this program, if they've got loved ones in prison, please educate yourself. You've got to do it, because that's the only way you're going to get out. And I would be my one piece of advice to anybody, you know, if you can't read and write. I couldn't read and write when I was in prison. I learned. I went on education lessons. I took City and Guilds. I passed 3 English exams, 3 maths exams. I done a City and Guilds level 1. And there was no stopping me. I studied law. I became a prison lawyer because I used to do all the human rights stuff for the prisoners as well when I was inside. Has anybody asked about writing a screenplay, Michael, about your experiences? Because it's very Shawshank Redemption, really, but actually even more compelling in so many ways. Well, I've had a few murmurs of people writing stuff, and there was an actress in Wales who wrote a script, but unfortunately for me, excuse me, the Sherman Theatre that was looking at it, the person got moved on to another theatre, and nobody's taken it up since. So, you know, there is a script actually wrote there. It just needs to be put into place, and I'm hoping that with what I'm doing now, that maybe in time, I'd love to see a film being made. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think Danny DeVito will play me.
Danny DeVito. I'm looking at a photograph. I'm looking at a photograph of you now. I could see that. I could see Danny DeVito getting the lead role. Tell me, you talked about education there, and you said that if anybody's listening and they have a youngster, God forbid, that ends up in prison, look after themselves. Now, I hate to be a negative Nelly, but I'm going to be a little bit negative. One of the things I'm very worried about, Michael, is the increasing and encroaching privatisation of prisons. And when we start turning prisons over to corporations, we're in trouble. I have a friend who was a governor of Mountjoy Prison in Dublin for many years. I wonder, did you come across them? John Lonergan is his name. For nearly 3 decades, he ran Ireland's most famous prison, and he's one of the nicest, he's an angel. A great, great man who did everything he could for prisoners and rehabilitation. And he's loved by prisoners, ex-cons, hardened cons. And he talks a lot about when we start giving over the care of prisoners to private corporations, we're in serious trouble, because obviously they only exist to turn a profit, and they won't care whether a young man leaves prison with better off than he came in. You know what I'm saying? So do you worry about the privatisation?
Yeah, I am. I know the one prison in Birmingham which was privatised, and it was taken over by G4. It was a well-known prison in England, and when they took over, it got so bad there that the government decided to put it back into public ownership again, and that was only recent. So that goes to tell its own story that prisoners for profits is not good, because there's no rehabilitation. You know what I mean? It's not in their interest to rehabilitate the prisoners if they want profit out of the prisoners. I mean, we've seen that in Europe, America, you know what I mean, where they're building all these prisons and they're making large amounts of money out of these inmates. These inmates are doing meaningful jobs, silly little jobs, mail bags and this, that, and the other. But it makes the system clean. And I mean, but that's not rehabilitation. And if they really talk about the criminal justice system and they want to better some of these lives, it has to stay in public ownership. It can't be private.
Yeah, because obviously corporations look to save as much money as they can, so they don't feed prisoners properly. They don't get enough time, obviously recreation time as much as they should. They certainly don't get the education that they might need. Michael, anytime you want to, I'm really enjoying speaking to you, so if you can stay on with me for a few minutes, I'd really appreciate it. But if you need to go anywhere, just tell me and I'll be happy to let you go. But I don't get too many opportunities to speak to people like you, so it's great to pick your brains. But can you stay with me for another 10, 15 minutes, do you think?
Yes, no problem at all.
You sure? Marvellous. Michael O'Brien is our guest, folks. Michael is in Wales and Aberdare. He's very well known because he was sentenced to he was sentenced to life in prison for a murder he did not commit back in the late 1980s. And dreadful time for him. He's written about it. It's many books about it. We're talking to Michael today because he's taken the Welsh First Minister to court over the legality of the lockdown, because Michael believes that it's having a terrible effect on people's quality of life and that breaches his human rights. And we're going to follow that really closely. But he's obviously very interested in the rehabilitation of prisoners. He basically turned himself into a lawyer when he was in prison. He educated himself in prison, got lots and lots of qualifications, and has written so many books. Great to have Michael on the programme today. You know what I was just thinking, speaking to you, you mentioned Texas a few minutes ago. When I was a younger man, I used to spend a lot of my time advocating for the abolition of capital punishment around the world, but I used to particularly focus on the United States. And I personally knew a gentleman whom was executed in Florida many years ago, in Jacksonville in Florida. I hate the death penalty and capital punishment. And you're writing about this now, you told us. Is this what, are you writing specifically about capital punishment in Texas, Michael? Tell us about that.
Yes, my book, the book I got at the moment, I've just signed a book deal with Waterside Press in England, and what I've done, I've looked at the cases where they've executed, innocent people. In my view, I mean, there's quite a few cases there. There's 16 in total. The youngest person who was executed was 14 years of age. Okay, it wasn't a Texas case, but it shows you the racism and everything which was involved in those days. A guy called George Stinney Jr., he was 14 years of age.
Yeah, I remember.
He was supposed to have two white girls, and they executed him. And they found out 70 years later that he didn't do it. I mean, that is horrifying. I've got an 8-year-old son. I've got another son as well. And I mean, I'd be horrified, if my son or daughter was executed and then 70 years later they decided to clear their name. The death penalty has no place in a civilized society today. This is another draconic measures, if you like, which I feel an outdated practice is medieval. And it has no place in a civilized society.
No, it doesn't.
Civilized people.
That story you mentioned about George, am I right in saying that there was a made-for-TV film about that many years ago starring Louis Gossett Jr.? Am I right? I think so.
I think there was a film about him. Another one is in the cinemas at the moment is Cameron Todd Willingham. He was supposed to have killed his daughters in a fire, and they later found out that the fire was started accidentally, but they tried to make out he did it deliberately. It was electrical fault. They executed him in 1976.
Wow. George Stinney, yeah. That's horrendous, isn't it? So you're focusing specifically on men that were executed, and it was later proved beyond a reasonable doubt that they didn't do it.
Absolutely. Robert Pruett as well is another one. He was supposed to have killed a prison guard. There was a number of prison snitches, if you like, who were involved in the killing and put him in the frame. He was wrongly executed back last year, and there is evidence there that he couldn't have done it. And I mean, I feel very emotional when I talk about these people's cases, because that could have been me.
Of course, we abolished capital punishment in the UK in 1969. Of course it could have been you. Less than 20 years later, when you were wrongfully convicted, if capital punishment was still used in the UK, we probably wouldn't be speaking, Michael.
Well, I work on a number of cases, not just on the death row cases, but I also work on a number of English and Welsh cases. And there's two cases, like Di Morris. There's a TV documentary going on the air on BBC on the 22nd of October, and there's new evidence in that particular case, which points to serious wrongdoing on behalf of the police. Again, South Wales case again. Doesn't surprise me. But and there's also a case I'm working on. A guy done 35 years in prison for something he hasn't done. His name's Ray Gilbert.
Do you not?
35 years.
35 years in prison for something he didn't do, and you believe the man is innocent? Jesus.
Absolutely. His case mirrors mine, where one of them confessed to the crime for something he hadn't done after many police interviews and bullying tactics and denial of access to lawyers. And as soon as he got access to a lawyer, he said he didn't do it, but then they still went ahead. There was no forensic evidence. There was no eyewitnesses. In fact, there was eyewitnesses. I'll give you an example. In the one person's case, there was 201 statements which were not disclosed to the defence in Ray's case. And yet he's still trying to get an appeal with the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And I'm working closely with Ray. I met him inside as well. And I know him inside and out. And he knows me inside and out. And we're still supporting each other. Very important case. Same as Di Morris. Di Morris is totally innocent in my view. I don't stick my name lightly to anybody's case.
Yeah.
I like to investigate it. I like to know the ins and outs. I want to know warts and all. The good, the bad, and the ugly, if you like. And there's no doubt about it. The two cases I've mentioned, I believe we'll be hearing from again soon. And one day they will get their name cleared. And another one is Jeremy Bamber's case.
No, well, you beat me to it. You beat me to it. You beat me to it. I was going to bring up Bamber as kind of like a final question. And I'll tell you what I'm not going to do today. I'm not going to argue with you. I should argue with you, but I won't. I'll tell you why. I've had some representatives of Jeremy Bamber on the programme in the past, and we've had a good conversation. It was very nice. And, they explained why they believe that Jeremy is innocent, and I put the other side of the case to them, and it was a very good back and forth. I won't do that today because we're going to run out of time in a couple of minutes anyway. But you've been to see Jeremy Bamber. Now, White House Farm, most of our listeners in the UK must have seen the ITV dramatisation earlier this year or last year, so they'll be familiar with this case. It's one of the most famous cases in UK history. Why are you so convinced that Jeremy is innocent? Go on, I'll give you the last word and I won't argue with you. Go ahead.
Well, I actually was in prison with Jeremy Bamber. I was in Long Lartin with him. And I actually know him personally. And, there was a programme the other night, I don't know whether you're aware, on Channel 5, which showed the new evidence, which showed that he couldn't have done it. I'll give you an example. The prosecution alleges that the silencer, the blood in the silencer had to come from Sheila Caffell, when in fact it was inconclusive and could have come from one of the Blanchflowers, one of the other family members. If that's indeed the case, he's been convicted on blood, which wasn't Sheila's, and it proves that she could have done it. She could have killed the whole family. And that was Jeremy's main argument at the trial, and he's been steadfast in that for nearly 33 years.
This is on Channel 5. I didn't see that. I wasn't even aware of it. I must look and see, can I watch it on demand? Because it's so controversial, isn't it? You know, when I spoke about it on the programme a couple of years ago, I got a lot of emails from people connected to the family, and they were, you know, screaming bloody murder that I'd allowed Jeremy supporters on the show. I mean, it's so contentious and so emotional. And I just said, look, I did give them a chasing. I did argue with them. I did put the other points across. If you'd like to come on, you can come on and I'll treat you the same way. But they never came on. It's so contentious. So I'll watch this programme on Channel 5. Do you think he'll ever be left out of jail, Jeremy Bamber?
Well, I know he's going for a new appeal. I know his solicitor's called Mark Newbury, and I can't go into the details of the new evidence he's got because obviously it's sub judice because the Criminal Cases Review Commission. But he's got significant new evidence which shows what was said at the trial could not have happened, and it certainly should clear Jeremy Bamber's name. And I will never waver from Jeremy because I know him personally. I've sat down with him. I know the ballistic test doesn't matter. There's so many different things in the programme which went out the other night, which you've got to look where the money's gone to as well. You know what I mean? And follow the money trail and why people said what they did. I mean, Julie Mugford, which is his girlfriend who put him in, if it wasn't for the fact that the so-called hitman she mentioned had an alibi, there would have been another innocent man in prison charged with accessory to murder. But he had an alibi, luckily. So if she was disbelieved on that point, why believe her on anything else? And she was given £25,000 from the News of the World to give evidence against him.
We'll have to pick this up again. I'll have to get some of the other side on because, you know, it's still in the consciousness of the public in this country. It hasn't gone away. People are still as interested in it as they ever were. Michael, I want to finish with where we came in. Good luck with your case with against Mark Drakeford, the Welsh First Minister. I think whatever happens, I think you've got every right to bring the case. These arbitrary rules, these acts, they brought in the Coronavirus Act and, of course, the statutory instruments they've given themselves without getting parliamentary approval. It's dreadful. It is in breach of human rights. I have no doubt it is. Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, as you said yourself. I wish you the very best with it. Thanks for coming on today, mate, and I hope you'll stay in touch and we'll catch up again in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.